After more than 3 decades leading large teams of people during a successful career in the education sector, Tony launched The Culture Doctor. Tony's work as an organisational culture consultant, geez, that was too much for me this morning, Tony, and business coach sees him liaise closely with senior executives across many industries. Tony has successfully delivered change management programs to scores of businesses, including local government bodies, professional services firms including engineers, environmental scientists and architects, as well as blue-collar businesses, an abattoir and a timber yard are amongst his many clients. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Dr. Tony Watt.
Thank you very much, David, for your welcome, and Rebecca, thank you very much for the invitation. I've enjoyed our time discussing some mutual interests, including my old high school, where we have a connection. So, the topic that I've chosen for today has been drawn from the famous quote from Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett's quote was, when the tide goes out, we find out who's been swimming naked. And the tide has gone out. Business conditions have changed dramatically. And we're talking about a new normal. What does it all mean for us? And some of us are being sorely tested on who we say we are for our people of our organisation and for our customers. Some customers are finding out in tough times that the company that we were connected with isn't possibly the company I thought they were, particularly when we've needed support and so on. So I thought this was an appropriate topic for us to start on. So let's talk about culture. It's my inch wide, mile deep. Over our next 20 minutes, and we've allocated 10 minutes for questions afterwards. I want to talk about what culture is, and most definitely what it isn't, and what you must do about taking control of your own organisational culture. It's actually quite simple, or at least I've tried to take some complex ideas and render them very simply. So let's make a start. I like to turn to a little bit of comedy first, and thought you might enjoy having a listen to what one of the great commentators with tongue-in-cheek says about culture. Dilbert. You can read that for yourself, I'm sure. I can assure you that culture is not about the cake. It most definitely isn't about the cake. And yet, you know, it's this nonsense that does go on in businesses that turns serious-minded business people like you off having anything to do with culture. If it's about this sort of nonsense, if that's what getting a culture right is about, this sort of nonsense, people like you say, I don't want to have anything to do with it. That's airhead stuff. And it really is. That's why, of course, it's so beautifully mocked by Dilbert. Great fan of Dilbert. So Alice and pointy-haired boss had an interesting exchange. She wanted to get on with doing some serious work. So I thought I would bring to you a very recent study of 1,500 leaders like you in small to medium enterprises, and they were asked a couple of profound questions about culture. So to the question of is culture a top organisational priority and critical to the company's performance, what percent do you think of those 1,500 said they strongly agreed that it was critical to the performance? Just have a brief guess with your table there, interaction. What percent do you think said they strongly agreed that it was critical to the performance?
Oh, I can't strongly agree. It's the biggest thing that I measure strongly.
I love being here with detail people.
15%.
The correct answer is all of them should have, but something less than all of them said yes.
No, I reckon they all said yes, but yeah, I reckon there's another one that said.
So the answer is 60%. 60%. And as I overheard a couple of tables, this is just the strongly agreed. No doubt if we add the agreed and the rest of it, there was a pretty overwhelming number there. So the sense is that we get it that culture is really important. And I'm going to make the case for you as to just how important it is. Let me though take you to an even more startling statistic that came out of that same survey when the question was asked, how many are satisfied with the strength of their own company culture? What do you think that percentage was? Of the 1,500 leaders of small to medium enterprises who were surveyed, what percentage said they were satisfied with their own culture?
100%.
Strength of their own, 100%.
20.
They don't want to recognise that there's a problem.
10. Okay, so David almost wins the gold watch and chain
Oh,
because it was a mere 11%. So that's, if I was to take that into this room, it would say 1 in every 10 people. So there are only 2 people in this room who are satisfied, if I could extrapolate that statistic, who are satisfied with the strength of their own company culture. That's what I call swimming naked. I'll make the case further. But if that statistic is true, that there's only 2 people in this room satisfied, and they're possibly deluded anyway.
Yeah, Deb, you might be satisfied, but let's ask Anastasia.
So, does anyone recognise that famous face? That's Peter Drucker, the so-called father of modern management. He had something to say about that survey. He strongly agrees because he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, it's often misunderstood. In fact, his whole quote was, culture eats strategy for breakfast, organisational excellence for lunch, and everything else for dinner. Why did he say that? Was he saying strategy isn't important? Hell no, strategy is very important. But he said, if you get your strategy right and your culture is RS, you're scaffolding strategy on shifting sands. You've got to have a dependable culture. You've got to know what it is and know it accurately. He had something else to say also. This powerful comment, and it's debated by some, those who want to go into the airy-fairy stuff and say, oh, some of this important stuff, you can't put a number around it, and that might be true. But Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Because if you can't measure it, you just don't know where it's at. There's no metric, there's no line of vision on it. There are only claims, hollow claims. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I'm going to draw on that strongly. So here's the issue. Why would you bother trying to measure culture? What's the point of all this culture stuff anyway? Why would you even be concerned about getting a culture right? Where does it lead? This guy understood it. This figure from history understood the importance of getting culture right, although he didn't have the word culture to put around it. But he said you can't, and it was in the sexist language of the time because most of the soldiers were men, you can't buy a man's life, but he'll give it to you for a medal. In fact, Napoleon said, I would have conquered the whole world if I could have bought enough ribbon. Isn't that a beautiful saying? He understood the nature of men, fickle that we are. That it's amazing, he said, how hard and how long a soldier will fight for a little piece of ribbon. He understood what motivated people and how to motivate them. It's a powerful statement. And you know, what he was looking for, what he obtained for his army was the competitive advantage that you should be seeking for your business. We're after the competitive advantage. We're in a competitive environment. And the competitive advantage and the point of culture is this. This is my message for the day. It's about getting the gift that your staff turn up, and you, if you work for others, that you turn up with every day of your working life. This gift, and you usually take it back home with you. It's called discretionary effort. It's called discretionary because you've got the complete discretion over whether you give the gift or you take it with you. And if you get your culture right, the companies with the best cultures get loads of discretionary effort. The boss doesn't have to pay for it. You can't buy it, you can't will it, you can't demand it. It's given as a gift. Discretionary effort. It's where you are as happy as mustard to turn up at work every day and you just love what you're doing because the environment is great. So the point about culture is discretionary effort. It has no other meaning. There's no other reason for it. And very few talk about discretionary effort. I'm going to make that case. Now, there are two cultures at work. One's real and one's aspirational. The sad thing, the fatal flaw, is that leaders misunderstand the difference between their aspirational culture and their real culture. And guess what? They masquerade the real culture as their aspirational culture, and they couldn't be further apart. Most shiny signs at the front of the office, most lovely words written on websites are aspirational. The real culture is another beast altogether, and a dangerous beast. And I'll make the case about those. So just want you to say, I just want to say, and I want you to take away from this, that if you are masquerading your aspirational culture as real culture, you're swimming naked and the tide's gone out, you're going to be found out. I'll show you some scary stories. Because that delusion is a wise man's hell. That delusion is a wise man's hell, mixing up an aspirational culture with a real culture. So let me show you a couple of celebrated naked swimmers. This is poor old Jeffrey Skilling, a CEO of Enron Corporation, a $101 billion company, the seventh largest energy or company out of Texas, in an energy company that went bankrupt. 4 years before they went bankrupt, they lost $70 billion. They were the mum and dad investors from across America who went to the wall with these guys because their numbers were sustained by systematic fraud. Arthur Andersen, who was the fourth largest accounting advisory in the world, went to its grave because they were found to be duplicitous in this fraud. So they're swimming naked. Let me show you what I call shiny brass plaque syndrome, suffered by most leaders. This was their brass plaque, rather tarnished now. Of course, Enron doesn't exist anymore. They went to the wall, bankrupt in 2001. It was the largest corporate collapse in America. Oh, but there were plenty more that followed. And I'll tell you just another one of them. They had integrity as one of their values. That was the aspirational, or that was the hoodwinking of the public to say, you can trust us, you can put your money with us because we believe in respect and integrity and the American way, and so on the blah blah goes. So I've called this shiny brass plaque syndrome. They had 22,000 employees. They had the best consultants that money could buy. They did engagement surveys until they fell off the cliff. They did engagement surveys that said our staff are highly engaged, what a wonderful company. Oh, and it went worse, didn't it? Do you remember the global financial crisis? This was Lehman Brothers, the great investment company. That's what greed looks like. They didn't put on their shiny brass plaque, one of our values is greed, but that's what their real culture was. And when it all went south in that short period of time they disappeared to oblivion. That's Lehman Brothers. That was at the time then, that was an even bigger corporate collapse than Enron, and it triggered the global financial crisis. But we need not just throw stones at our American cousins. We haven't too much to be proud of in our own country. We've just come through the Hayne Royal Commission into the financial sector, and I'm sure there are going to be some executives go to jail over some of the things that we've said have been corporate crime, white-collar crime. And in fact, Hayne said, and he channels, if you like, what Drucker was saying. And Hayne gets it slightly wrong, because even the Royal Commissioner didn't completely understand about culture. But he said that the behaviours and the outcomes, so behaviours and outcome, that's the second big clue for this morning. The behaviours and outcomes that culture drives. It's actually not culture, it's values and beliefs drive, because culture's the whole package. But let's go with Hayne anyway. He said, can and should be measured. He actually says, when he's investigated, pull the cover back on these very powerful, well-resourced financial sector companies, the biggest on our own Australian stock market. He said that we pulled the covers back and found out that they aren't what they say they are. And in fact, the behaviours that we've found, greed and fraud and misrepresenting the books and so on, is commonplace. No wonder the federal government resisted it for so long, holding the Royal Commission. And so let's have a look at the dear old Commonwealth Bank, just to pick on the biggest one. And I could have picked anyone. They say that there was a $1.2 billion cost associated with the uncoverings by the Royal Commission into the findings. And of course, the massive cost of winning back trust, the loss of trust, that's what happened. The one thing we all want with clients and customers and staff are high levels of trust, a high trust environment. And there's a massive cost, much bigger, the $1.2 billion loss, which is in financial terms. That's the thing that we need to be very concerned about. But I just want to spend a moment and have a look at their core values that they had at the time of from their website. There they are again, the shiny brass plaque syndrome. Write them up on a fancy board and it shall be so. It was anything but integrity, collaboration, excellence, accountability and service. Failed on all 5 of them, and that's the core of who they said they were. And look, they've learnt nothing. In 2020, I've just taken it off their website. They've just played with the words. Integrity now is we do what is right. Now that's fine, that's lovely, but back to the wise man's hell. How do you know? If you're not measuring it, how do you know? But hey, culture's this fluffy thing, this airy-fairy thing, you can't measure it. That's the myth in business. That's what we say, you can't measure culture. Well, I say you're wrong. You can measure culture, and it can be measured very easily, and I'm going to give you some clues to that in the couple of minutes that remain. So the massive cost there. Commonwealth Bank is still swimming naked, and the tide has gone out. They're still swimming naked. It's being wallpapered over with some fancy words and some schmeck advertising campaign, but there's no measure on who they say they are. They're swimming naked. Now, you've got a choice with your own company. You can have a culture by default, and you've got that right now. You've got that right now. Every organisation of one person, starting with one person and greater, has a culture. Your customers know it, your competitors know it. There's something about the nature of your company that we call culture, about its values, what it stands for, and how it behaves. as Hayne, the Royal Commissioner, was saying. So if you ask people what is culture, most things, and universities say, most people say, oh, it's the way we behave around here. I think it was Lewis Carroll who said, it's the way we behave when no one's looking, when no one's watching. But that's only half right, because Simon Sinek's been telling us about starting with why. You need to start with why, which is at the essence of who you are. So, the why we do things around here, or the way we do things around here, that's the big debate in culture. In fact, they're both right, they're both half right. Put them together and you get close to exactly what culture is. This is what I'm advocating. You should take charge of your culture, and it should be one by design. That is your aspirational culture, and you should be actively working at it. So let me give you a simple metaphor. When someone talks about culture, I want you to just think of an iceberg. I've got a fancy diagram that I did as part of my doctoral work, and I use it as a cure for insomnia these days. If someone can't sleep, I say, here, take this chart to bed with you, gaze at it for 5 minutes, I guarantee you'll fall asleep. This is a simple way to understand culture. Culture is the iceberg, the whole of the iceberg. And it's got a number of components that I map. I'm just going to skim over the top of them for today. Values. We've got to be talking about values. And there's a science around values. It's called axiology. And the second one is beliefs. And you see I'm mapping them in the deepest part of the iceberg, where it was formed up in the mountains a couple of thousand years ago. You can drill into it. We can tell what the weather was like at the time of Christ by drilling into the depths of the formation of the iceberg. And that's where I map values and beliefs. Both topics have to be thought about with culture. And this is the one Hayne was talking about. At the very visible part of the iceberg, behaviours. And I'll go to why I've mapped it there. Now, there's the why of culture. It's the beliefs and values. That's where why sits. You'll notice something about that, why the iceberg is important, because the popular definition of the way of culture is the bit above the waterline. The bit that sunk the Titanic wasn't the bit above the waterline. They saw that bit, and as they steered too late, it was the bit under the water, the big hidden bit, massively bigger than the bit you can see that ripped the bottom out of the Titanic and set it to its watery grave. So I want to just go further into the metaphor and say to you, the reason the iceberg is so important is that there's a margin, and it's the margin between the visible, the above the waterline, and the invisible, the bit below the waterline. And so we say, in fact, that this bit, beliefs and values, are in our private subjectivity, to use the language. You can't see someone's values, you can't see their beliefs. That's usually why people say you can't measure culture. You can't see values, you can't see beliefs. There's 128 formal values, there are thousands of beliefs. And I could give you a range of topics here. We could start with COVID-19, and there'd be 15 beliefs around COVID-19. Some of them be similar, some of them be very personal, and so on. But when we produce our cognition, it's published. Behaviours are a publication of what's going on inside our heads. All of our behaviours, your body language. Look at your publication you made this morning. When you got up, you went to the wardrobe, you dressed in a particular way. Some people decide they're going to have a beard. Some people don't have a choice about whether they've got hair on the top of their head, but for most of us, when we take a particular hairstyle, go to the barber, we're publishing meaning without remedy all of the time. We are publishing. Our cognition is being published, and it becomes visible. So this is the clue as to why this is a great metaphor for culture. Let me take you to a couple of quick final concepts. We hear a lot about engagement surveys. This is a shallow measure of culture, and most companies are doing it in the world. For the last 30 years, it's been all about engagement surveys, and there are a fair amount of nonsense in it, quite frankly. because it's not measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. What we should be focusing on are alignment, aligning the behaviours of your organisation with the values of the organisation if you don't want to swim naked. So it should be about alignment surveys, finding out the alignment between how your company is behaving against the values that you profess. So here's where you start. This is a company I'm working with at the moment. And the starting point is to say, what are my make or break values? What are the values of the organisation that you've breathed into existence? Whoever owns the company owns the values, and they need to be stated. Now, a lot of people only go that far and put that stuff up. That's where you get your Enrons and your Commonwealth banks with their fancy words. But it's got to be what you believe are the things that if you get them right, it'll make your company, and if you get it wrong, it'll break your company. That's why I call them make or break values. These are fantastic. They're very sincere, working with the owner, and he believes deeply in these things. He wants to get those right with his people. And so the starting point then is to be able to benchmark your cultural health. And two famous American professors, Cotter and Hesketh, established without a doubt with longitudinal studies that increasing productivity is a function of cultural health. The higher the cultural health, then the higher the productivity, because you're getting into discretionary effort. Remember, we started with discretionary effort. So this is just a framework that I map, benchmark where the company is according to their values and the behaviours as measured by their staff, the beliefs of their staff. I don't chase a rational model, which are engagement surveys. They're a rational model. Humans aren't rational. We'd still have Julia Gillard as our Prime Minister, and we'd have a carbon exchange scheme running in the country if rationality and science carried the day. Tony Abbott smacked it out of the water because he got in touch with the fears and the beliefs of the Australian public, at least somewhere around 50% of them, enough to be able to roll someone who had all the science behind her. Humans aren't rational, so rational measures never cut the mustard. You've got to get into the beliefs of your people, and you've got to, that's reality, what the people believe about your organisation. And great companies are believed into action. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So, are you interested in benchmarking your real culture, or are you just wanting to keep swimming naked and hoping no one will notice a difference when the tide goes out? So, let's continue our conversation and see what questions you've got.
Let me ask one first.
Okay, you go.
I've worked in many organisations, and I work with some very large ones and some very small ones. Now, I see a lot of zebra stripes, and as much I keep painting them and turning into a white horse, the zebra stripes come back. So I keep struggling with the idea that the only way I fix this problem is a pile of crucifixions and remove them from the organisation. I don't often see people's behaviour modified. I see it hidden, but I don't see it modified. How do we fix that?
So, my experience is the problems often rest with the leadership and the boss.
That's where the zebras are.
That's where the shiny brass plaque stuff is at work, and most effective change, well, all effective change has to be led from the top. So when I come into an organisation, they say, I'll hand you over to the HR department. I say, I'm not interested in the gig. Unless you as a leader are prepared to be in the trenches with your team on this and show that you are committed to cultural change, it ain't going to work. You'll get compliance, which is what the engagement surveys often do. You can get compliance. We saw what happened with the Fitzgerald inquiry into the Queensland Police Service. That when the outgoing commission Commissioner Atkinson left, he said the old culture is still just there below the surface. We have to be eternally vigilant, or it will appear again, and so on. So cultural change as against compliance. One of the American presidents said some time ago, if you get them by the short and curlies, the hearts and minds are sure to follow. That's compliance. You know, if you can jail people and you punish people, you'll get compliance. But like the Russians found after Lenin, with 100 years of killing people in large numbers, the Christian church was just below the surface, and under perestroika, Christian church has come out in Russia stronger than ever was. So cultural change is very different from cultural compliance or behavioural compliance. Change is something that's very deep and stout and resilient, if we get in
What
touch
you
with
just told
true
me
values and true behaviours.
is I'm going to throw the boss out. I'm going to pick the subordinates that have been fostering the behaviour, the ideals that they've been creating. We said Commonwealth Bank and those. So I'm not just getting rid of the boss, I'm getting rid of the key executives of the organisation as well.
Could be, or they need to change, but sometimes
I don't see change happen.
Yeah, well, it's a powerful observation. I can't argue with you. I can't argue with you.
So, Tony, do you think an organisation that maybe has a successful culture and it goes through generational change, does the culture need to change to suit the generation?
Beautiful question. Beautiful question. It's a profound question, if I may say so. I always say when I go into an organisation, who owns the values? And they say, oh, my grandfather wrote that. I said, oh, could I meet your grandfather? Oh no, he died 20 years ago. Well, if he died and they're his values, who owns them now? Oh, and the son who's got the company says, oh, I don't agree with them. I said, well, how can you expect anyone in the company to agree with them? What are your values? You own the company. The idea of owning a company is you say, I believe profoundly in this stuff and I'm going to recruit people who also believe in it. If you get that, there's alignment and you get discretionary effort. People love working there. Rather than, oh God, work again today. I walked through Queen Street Mall when we used to be allowed to, and in the mornings early, all these people going to work, they're not happy. It's time serving. But these companies that have got great cultures that are getting the discretionary effort from their people are joyful. They turn up before the doors open, they want to be there. They're there after work because there's something deep inside them they're satisfying because they're perfectly aligned. And that's the hard bit, finding what this alignment is. It starts with getting the value statement right and authentic. Not going up into the mountains with the expensive consultant and struggling back with the tablets of stone and saying, you know, let's bolt these up on the wall and everyone will come, because the staff, when they walk in and they know it ain't true, the staff go, to you boss, you know, and to you corporate culture. And the disgruntled clients who aren't finding integrity spit on it on the way in. And you'll get mocked by your clients when it goes wrong. That's why this stuff has to be so authentic. If it's not authentic, it won't last. Shiny brass plaque syndrome. What's that burning question you'd like to ask? Please do.
I'm interested to know whether or not you've seen organisations where they have a head office that has a very different culture than a state-based culture. And obviously you can't put all the levers at a head office environment when you're state-based, so you've seen my circumstance. But you really want to create an amazing culture at a state-based level. Have you seen that be successful, and what ways would you recommend starting that process?
Well, it's again another profound question because it is at the heart of the stuff we've got to get right. The company has a set of values and they apply all over the place. I dealt with one of my clients was Tate & Lyle, listed on the London Stock Exchange. They're a food additive company, a huge company. And the culture in their Hong Kong base or their Chinese branch is very different from Melbourne. Melbourne's very different from Brisbane, but they've got the same, what they call 3 core values and 5 performance values, whatever the hell that means, but they had 8 values. I don't think you should have any more than 5 values in the company because you can't even though most bosses, when I say, tell me what your company values are, oh, let me go and look it up. I think, my God, that's living in the company and you're the boss. You've got to be top of mind, they've got to be known. But they can be expressed differently. So it's the behaviours. That bit of the iceberg, the bit that's making it all work hangs in there. They don't change. Same values all over the world for that company. But they can be expressed differently. Where it goes wrong is where the branch says we don't believe in those values. We've got a different set of values. I say keep the same values, just interpret them into behaviours for your branch, what they mean, and believe in those things and you're delivering them. So I say the boss owns the bit under the water and the team members own the bit above. It's called, some call them a conduct code, but you're getting that alignment by doing those two things.
Thank you.
You'll stop me when you've my 20 minutes.
I run a number of not-for-profits, and the very difficult thing is giving everyone a very easy recipe for decision making, because people are very autonomous and need to be, I suppose, feel like they're in control and can make decisions. And so someone many years ago said to me, it must survive the Courier Mail test. Now, I know the Courier Mail doesn't go out to everyone as it did, but it still is a very important way to explain to my staff. I say, if you wouldn't want your mother to read this about you making this decision poorly in the Courier Mail tomorrow, of course it would be Facebook, Twitter and wherever else now, then don't do it.
But the point is, you do want to make the front page of the Courier Mail for the right reasons. And that's because you are behaving your values to such a point, it's a good news story every time. So what you're saying is stay true to the company. You don't get caught out for fraud and greed and the rest of it. Because, see, the thing about engagement and alignment, Commonwealth Bank employees were highly engaged, but they were engaged with evil. It's still high in engagement. Engagement surveys say, yeah, you can be engaged, but with greed and evil and so on. But if you're aligned with your values, it excretes the greed. It gets rid of those evils and so on that bring companies down. That's why the values have got to be make or break values, and they've got to be lived out authentically in the behaviours of the organisation, the bit above the water. That's what culture's about. So you're right, you don't want to make the front page of the Courier Mail for the wrong reasons. And the reason you'll do that is because you're betraying your values or your professed values, the aspirational culture.
Yeah.
But the real culture lurks, as Steve Simpson does in his unwritten ground rules. He says when you join a company, forget about the published policies, the shiny brass plaque, work out the unwritten ground rules if you want to survive. But the unwritten ground rules can be evil. It can be damaging and destroying. It can be bullying. You go into hospitals. The stories about surgeons bullying other staff, junior staff. You go into we're talking about law firms where it's hell sometimes for young lawyers coming and joining work conditions. You go into tradies and so on with apprentices. The way some terrible behaviours. Well, I was treated that way when I was apprentice, so they're damn well going to get it from me. It's the culture. Well, it's a bad culture. It's a terrible culture. It doesn't make it right because everyone did it. So it is that Courier Mail test. Absolutely, I agree with you. I'm waiting for you to wrap me up.
Yeah, one more question, Judith, the Auries.
We actually use the words unwritten ground rules in a culture changing activity we participated in. And I wonder how much that naming the elephant in the room of saying these are what we know are our unwritten rules, how much that can action that change of heart when people actually swim nakedly for a while perhaps.
Yes. Absolutely. In fact, the exercise that I use in getting up the measure, the metric, is about naming what perfection looks like and naming what toxic looks like and scoring on that continuum in 25 measures that's developed by the staff. So the unwritten ground rules don't make them right. That's why I say Steve Simpson is only half right when he says it's the way we behave around here. That might describe the real culture, but the aspirational culture is driven by the aspirational culture is driven very much by the values of the organisation. So we're out of time. Please contact me if you're determined to take control of the culture of your company. I work with very small and very large organisations, and the important thing is that you earn some discretionary effort from your team. You'll be found out if you go back into the water naked. Thanks everyone.